show up Friday.
There was a no-show on Friday.
Oh, so we didn't miss anything.
Yeah,
Didn't
you
show up.
did. You missed him not showing.
Perfect.
In custody?
He
Not
didn't
yet.
do anything too.
Oh, yeah. Remember, he was one of the no-shows.
Yeah.
Number 12.
Cyber stock. The city was asking us to grab it.
Sorry.
Thank you for the interruption.
Let him interrupt.
Enjoy the dream. Mystical experience.
Okay, we're back on the record in the Gibson-Martin matter. We left off yesterday with Mr. Gibson's on the witness stand. Ms. Martin's cross-examining him, so if you'd retake the witness stand, sir. You're still under oath from yesterday.
Okay.
We left off with the day that Ezekiel was born.
Well, I'd like to start by cleaning up a few matters from yesterday, if that's okay, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
In two different hearings before Judge Ruley, the three of us argued whether or not you'd ever been ordered to take a mental health evaluation, and you said it had never been ordered. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay. So we dug and dug, and Judge Ruley asked me when, and he couldn't find it. And I have the document here from Commissioner Scheinberg. This was part of the negotiation between her and I of me getting out of jail, that you get a mental health evaluation, and her order reads, "Father shall submit to a psychological evaluation through Dr. Kirk Johnson and Vancouver Guidance Clinic to be paid by Clark County Superior Court." Do you recall this document at all?
No, I don't think I've ever seen that document.
Apparently.
Let's show him the document then.
Sure.
Is it a court
This
order?
was,
Is it a court order?
Given to me by your people. And here is where Commissioner
What's the date of the order?
July 31st, 2009.
July 31, 2009. And it's signed by Commissioner Scheinberg?
Yes, Your Honor.
Where?
Would you like to look at the document?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to tell on that NCR, but
I have difficulty reading all of this stuff.
I see it.
What I find for that date.
what's the document number?
63, if it's 7/31 of 09.
63.
Clerk's minutes from that date, 63.
I remember the part about you having telephone contact with Ezekiel at 6 p.m. every day, and we did that. That I'm not to have telephone contact with you. We didn't. And my recollection is I did go to Dr. Kirk Johnson's office.
Okay, but you weren't clear why you were there. Is it clear now that it was a court order? And it doesn't say anything about a brief phone-in. It says a psychological evaluation to be paid for by the court.
Your point being?
You were not truthful in your testimony about this event.
Well, it could be not truthful or it could be recollection, since we've been
Okay.
to court 50,000 times.
Okay, you have a poor recollection of that. Yesterday, you testified that the reason you did not show up for the restraining order hearing is you did not know about it. Did you want to amend that
Not at
testimony?
all.
Okay. I have here, let's see, a document that, return of service that I filed on October 18th, 2010. It was accepted by the court, to my knowledge, as a declaration in a return of service. On this return of service, I filed an email exchange between you and I that took place on September 27th and September 28th on 2010. Do you have any recollection of this email exchange between you and I that is attached to my return of service from October 18th, 2010?
I have no idea, I haven't seen it.
In this email, I am contacting you saying, we have a restraining, where are you living? I have paperwork to serve you. I got a restraining order from Clark County that restrains you from coming near me and Ezekiel and keeps you away from his school. The hearing is next Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. in front of Scheinberg. You cannot come here before then. Where can I serve your papers? You responded. That was the 27th at, let's see, 20:31, so I'm not good at military, 8 in the evening? You responded at 10:50 that evening and said, 5 years is a long time not to see your son. You and Patrick are going to prison for lying and crying to the grand jury. Your restraining order will be thrown out. Ezekiel loves me. When he testifies without your influence, he will tell the truth, something you have great difficulty doing. Patrick attempted to murder me. You are a co-conspirator. You have lied to the court. You have slandered me publicly. You are a trained professional killer. I am in hiding so I won't be killed by either of you. And it goes on and on and on and on and on.
Let's go with the on and on and on.
Oh, okay. No, actually, this is my time to question you. I'm getting to the point.
Okay, ask the question. Just ask the question, please.
So, were you aware, did you receive this email and respond to it, knowing there was a hearing on Wednesday at 1:30 with Commissioner Scheinberg where you could defend your right to see your son?
No. I do remember the email that I sent back to you because you guys had threatened my life, and I did go into hiding, and there was no way I was going to meet with you until I talked to the judge, which I did, and let him know that after I was served in court in Hillsborough, after I was served in court by process servers, as we were sitting there waiting for a hearing to begin, I'm served, and now I have a restraining order against you. You have a restraining order against me. I let my attorney, Julie Fallender, know that you were sitting across from me and you had a restraining order against me. And so we had to go out of a different door, and I came to the court the next day and pleaded with Judge Ruley that I was served with a restraining order. I had no knowledge of any kind of a proceeding because I didn't look at all that. I just had to say, I'm not meeting with you. You guys threatened my life. I had nothing to do with that.
So you're
That's
saying
my understanding of it.
this
The part
email
about
isn't
the date and all that.
accurate. Okay. Yesterday I asked
Let
you.
him finish his answer before you interject,
I'm
please.
sorry, Your Honor.
And if he belabors the point, then I will cut him off.
Thank you, Your Honor.
So what I needed to draw attention to you is that you guys had threatened my life with some cocaine dealing woman out of Florida, a Columbia drug dealer named Giselle Blanco. You had threatened my life more than one time when you kicked me with a karate kick on the balcony. And your professional security, all this kind of training that you've had, yeah, you threatened my life. I went into hiding. I took it seriously, and I still do.
So your testimony is still that you never knew there was a restraining order hearing?
Not until I was served with papers at the hearing. Then I knew that there was one. I'd have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay. Yesterday, you said you had shown up in Judge Willie's court the day after.
Day after I was served at the hearing, that's correct.
Let her finish the question before you start your answer, please.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and move on. The email evidence shows you were corresponding with me about that incident. Then, so you did not show up in Commissioner Scheinberg's courtroom on October 10th, 2010, to defend your right to see your son. But on the 19th of October, you showed up in Judge Ruley's courtroom, camped out all day, and insisted that he get me on the phone so you could discuss your Mercedes and your belongings. Is that correct?
You had indicated to me that you were
Yes or
going...
no? Yes or no?
Yes.
So you were in mortal fear of your life, not willing to come advocate for your son, but you showed up in this courtroom to advocate for your Mercedes and your belongings. Is
No,
that
that's
correct?
a lie.
Yesterday, we had a discussion about the phone call that got you arrested in 2005, and you told me on 2 occasions that you did not make that threatening phone call. Kathy Reed did. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do you want to stick with that testimony?
Absolutely.
I'd like to read in a paragraph from the 2005 police report that was successfully put on the record yesterday. I'd like to read the police officer's testimony about those phone calls, with your permission, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
On the same day, Gibson called Martin's cell phone and
Okay.
this is the same day. Okay, let's see. The first is dated May 14th, 2005. On the same day, Gibson called Martin's cell phone and left a message. I listened to the message that started with the originating phone number of 503-740-7907, dated June 1st, 2005 at 7:30 p.m. The message is a male voice saying he would get custody and commenting on the ridiculous pictures on TriMet. The male voice goes on to say he would get custody because she did not have any consideration for Ezekiel's safety, and went on to further say, you blew it, you did this, I'm suing you, TriMet, you won't see a dime of it. Martin told me she recognized the number as Reed's cell phone number and the voice was Gibson's. Martin further explained that she is an advertisement and has pictures of her and Ezekiel displayed for advertisement purposes. Martin said there were numerous other cell phone calls and emails from Gibson. Martin was unable to show me the additional calls as her phone deletes incoming call numbers after so many are received. Martin did not have Gibson's home number, however, I was able to locate him in PPDS. Close enough. So the police officer saying that it was a male voice on the phone, that I identified the male voice as you, and that the male was speaking of suing me for custody of Ezekiel. Are you still stating for the record that you did not make that call?
You just agreed with me. You just said Kathy Reed made the phone call. Read it again. I didn't make the phone call. She
I'd be happy to
did.
make the phone call. I'd be happy to read it again. Is that necessary, Your Honor? The police officer says it came from her cell phone. It was your voice.
Her cell phone. I didn't call you.
Okay,
called
I'm going to
you.
move on.
Thank you.
Clear that Judge Ruley understands my point. Okay, on your first filing, you filed a chunk of my diary that,
Diary?
yeah, a diary that you claimed you found in my absence while I was in Arizona, along with Mr. Calvin's testimony. You filed a diary of mine that you claimed you found while I was in Arizona.
I have no idea. I can't see it.
Okay. Do I need to show it to him? Or can I finish with where I'm going with this first?
Finish where you're going first.
Okay, the diary, which I did not dispute that I wrote these things. The first page is dated Tuesday, 4/16, 2007, in my handwriting. Then it goes on, it says 5/1 at the top of this page, but it doesn't indicate what year it is. But, you know, we're in April of 2007. The next page you chose is 5/1, so we're kind of assuming by the dialogue that we're still in 2007. And then all of a sudden, at the end of one entry, in the next entry, it says May 2, 2008. So apparently I took a whole year off from this diary. And on May 2nd, 2008, although I have submitted Greyhound records to show I was in California on my way to Arizona, somehow someone wrote May 2nd, 2008 on this diary entry, And there's no way I could have written it because I was not in the state when you claim you found this in my absence.
For him, or you want
Do
to
you
testify
have
about
any
the diary?
idea how this happened? 'Cause
I don't
this is
even
your
know what you're
evidence that
talking about.
you,
Okay, answer is, I don't know what you're talking
don't
about.
know.
Next question.
okay. In this document filed 9/11/08, I filed the proof of the Greyhound records that I was not in the state on May 8th, 2008, when you claimed the diary entry was written. Yesterday, I received this paperwork, a motion for change of custody, you asking for full custody of Ezekiel, and you stated, petitioner is currently certified by the state of Oregon as a care provider for young children. Did you bring that certification with you to show the court?
No, I didn't. There's a witness here that can testify to it. She's on the witness list. She'll be here soon.
Okay, and one of my many, many attempts to get a restraining order or amend the temporary order, this was January 11th, 2010. I was attempting to have the temporary order modified and force you into supervised visits instead of the weekend arrangement we had. And I can't read your declaration very clearly here. May I ask him to read the last paragraph of the declaration he wrote? That is on the record for...
For what purpose?
Because he is emoting about me detoxing the child, and that we went down the road and we started to argue about the child's medical problems and his diet. And he's brought this onto the record. I'd like to...
Or you cross-examine him in regards to a question you have. You don't show him documents and say, read it.
Okay. Well, I can't read his writing is the problem, so I'm not clear what his testimony was.
Well, then there's nothing for you to ask.
Okay, I'll move on.
Actually, if you can't read what he said, then I don't take it into consideration either.
Okay. I just have one more question about something you filed. Let's see, this is filed 7/22/09. It is signed by a professional in this courthouse. And this is a supplemental declaration of petitioner motion to amend temporary order. You made a statement that you're talking about Patrick. He did threaten me because I contacted his parents looking for my son. I accused him of trying to take my son. He stated that I would never see EWG again. This is not an individual who should be taken seriously given his bad faith and unclean hands. Could you explain to me what bad faith and unclean hands is?
Yeah, he's molesting my son.
Okay, so this is
With your knowledge and approval.
7/22/09, and you believe at this point that he's being molested.
I had no idea. I know that now. He has
Well, but
unclean hands
this
for a
is when
variety
you
of
said
reasons.
he had unclean
He has
hands.
unclean hands for a variety of reasons.
Okay. I'm ready to move on.
What was the basis in July of 2009, Mr. Gibson?
The basis
Yes.
for
Were you making that statement?
Debbie Fonuribi, my attorney at that time, said to me that, if my recollection serves me, that because he's been involved in all of these kinds of things to try to keep my son from me, that whatever he said there is not going to be taken seriously because he's got unclean hands. He's a conspirator in this attempt to keep me from having anything to do with my own flesh and blood. And for what reason, nobody knows but you. And, you know, you're loco. Who knows? I don't know.
Okay. I'm ready to move on, Your Honor. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
How do you spell your last name, Mr. Gibson?
Gibson.
Have you ever spelled it Gipson on a court
Absolutely.
document? Have you declared to this court or Washington County or Multnomah County, where you have appeared numerous times, that you use an alias?
Absolutely. It's not an alias. My father's name is Gipson. But during World War II...
Okay, what's the relevancy?
Yes.
What's the relevancy?
Well, I have documents that he has, in this courthouse, used both names to kind of work his DMV problems, and I was just wanting to know if he announced to the court, because I've never heard it in 3 years, that he was doing this.
He says he has, so...
Okay. Why did your niece go to prison?
Objection, irrelevant.
She lives in the home.
Overruled. Answer the question.
My niece went to prison because she was picked up in someplace in Portland, Oregon. I believe they were looking for her for shoplifting, and she was arrested.
She went to prison for 4 years for shoplifting?
I wasn't in the courtroom.
Isn't it true that she and her child's father fled and left the child in the car when the police were pursuing them for drug activities?
What does that have to do with this hearing, this trial?
She lives in your home. I'm trying to determine whether it's a safe place for our son.
Well, let's determine if my son is in a safe place where he's being molested by your
Answer
boyfriend.
the question, Mr. Gibson. Is the lady living in your home? If so, it's relevant.
She lives in the bottom part of my house. That's correct. We have separate living quarters. Separate kitchens, separate bathrooms. She lives there. And she has done her time for this. She has filled her time. She has a relationship with her son now. Her brother went through the proceeding to adopt the child until she did her prison term. She's done her time as by the state of Oregon. She's out. She's in all kinds of therapy, and she's doing just fine.
Have they rewarded her custody of her child?
She's not looking for custody of her child. I'm looking for custody of my child.
During one of your visitations with Ezekiel in your apartment in Vancouver, did the police knock on your door to do a welfare check on Ezekiel?
I believe, I remember something like that. And your point being?
Well, I easily got them to knock on your door when I was concerned about my son in your care. Have you ever tried to do a welfare check on me?
I think that when we did the welfare check on Ezekiel, it was some kind of, I'm not really clear with the situation. I vaguely remember something like that. But I think that was done a welfare check. Maybe that was even instigated by me because you were there. I'm not sure. No?
No, I called.
I don't recollect. I don't know. I don't
It was
remember.
during one of your visits. I'll talk about it later.
So many things have happened. I
Right.
just don't
Got
know.
it. When you were a Black Panther, did you carry a gun?
No,
Did you have martial arts skills?
vaguely.
What qualified you to be Angela Davis's bodyguard?
Objection, Your Honor. It's irrelevant.
Sustained. I don't care what he did 40 years ago.
Well, he's trying to paint me as so dangerous that I wouldn't be afraid of him. I'm entitled
There's
to...
a certain point in time, prior
Give it
to
up, got it.
relationships that you don't get into because they're called remote.
Got it.
It's not relevant.
Okay.
Whether he was her bodyguard or her boyfriend.
Well, my point, Your Honor, is he spent a lot of time telling everyone how dangerous and qualified I am. Don't I have the right to show that he was equally intimidating with his skills? He was a Black Panther as a bodyguard, and I'm
Objection,
not
Your
allowed to
Honor.
be intimidated by him?
You asked him if he had any black belt skills.
Well, he was Angela Davis's
And
bodyguard.
he said he wasn't. He said
No, he didn't say he wasn't her bodyguard. He's bragged about it for years.
No, I'm not talking about bodyguard. The question is, you are a black belt in karate, which is relevant to the fear issue that you may have had or not had because of this man. So the question is, does he have equal skills?
Yeah, I'm trying to establish that he could be. He's saying I couldn't possibly be intimidated by him. I train cops. I'm a bodyguard. All this, but he has intimidating skills as well. I don't have the right to get that on the record.
Go ahead.
I'm done. I think you get what I was going for.
Well, you better put it on the record.
Okay. So you made a lot of noise yesterday, and you even embellished my professional career, thank you, saying I do presidential security, I train police officers, etc. I couldn't possibly be intimidated by you.
And that's true.
Okay, so you don't have any skills that qualified you as a Black
I'm not
Panther.
a holder of any kind of martial arts belt whatsoever.
Okay, I can move on. When you were a Black Panther, did you smoke pot?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Have you ever smoked marijuana?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained. Get back into
Well, he
the
claimed-
90s or, this period of time where you guys are
The
associating
person,
together. When you're associating together Ezekiel's life, it's that time frame I'm concerned with because what he did as a 20-year-old
Well-
is not relevant, okay?
Okay,
So-
but yesterday we had this discussion, Your Honor. I didn't want the book in evidence because it was written before I ever met this man, and you said, when did I tell you that you can't discuss anything before the child's birth? And you expected me to produce a document. Is that what we're doing now? We're not talking...
What was this?
Yesterday-
What was your question?
Well, I'm asking you for clarity now, because yesterday we were arguing. I told you that you specifically told him and I, we're not discussing anything about your lives before Ezekiel came along. What you did when you were single adults, none of my business. We're here to talk about the child.
Correct.
Yesterday, when I didn't want the book in evidence, it's because the book is about my life from childhood on up to before I even met him.
Your Honor.
Okay, you were disputing that you ever said we couldn't bring in stuff from before Ezekiel's birth. That's why...
There's a time period prior to his birth when you guys were living together, courting each other. That time period is relevant.
Okay, but you let him... Yesterday, he entwined a story from my book about me doing a seance when I was 12, and he wrapped it into a story to make it sound like I did it last week with Ezekiel. That's the danger. The reason I'm bringing this up is because he has told this court that he's never smoked pot, he wouldn't allow it in his home, nothing but prescription drugs,
Sorry,
and it's not the
he
truth.
hasn't testified to that in this trial yesterday and today so far.
It's on the record.
No.
Okay.
Hear me again. He has
Okay.
not testified
Okay,
yesterday or today that he's never smoked pot.
okay,
The question has never been asked.
okay. I'm just trying to
Don't-
dispute some of the
let me
things he
clarify
filed.
one more thing for you folks, one more time. This thing about on the record, the record has been being made in the last 24 hours. That is the only record that I'm going to go by in making my decisions, okay? There are court orders that have been entered in regards to contempt hearings that I consider. There is an order of the family court report that I required. So when you say on the record, don't be confused by all these declarations that you filed for the last 3 years as being part of the record, because they are not.
So it's okay to file untruths because later they don't matter unless the witness is in the courtroom?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
When those documents were filed, the time to rebut those documents was at that hearing.
Okay,
But as far as what happened at that hearing and the declarations that were filed, they are not evidence at this trial.
okay. Do you remember the night in Patrick's trailer when I was 6 months pregnant that you asked him to be our child's godfather?
No.
The first day we met, I gave you my business card. Do you remember what it said?
Yes.
Can you tell the court?
Denise Martin, CEO, eating my way to heaven, I work for God.
Thank you.
But it didn't say which God.
You testified yesterday that although you accompanied me to on a long, painful Greyhound trip to L.A. to promote my book to Dr. Phil, you had not read it. Is that correct?
Not at that time. Excerpts from it, but I had not read the book.
You're a devout Christian man, and you've been calling me Satan continually since December 6, 2001, but you were going to promote a book called Eating My Way to Heaven without reading it. Is that your testimony?
No, I wasn't going to promote a book. I was going there with you to help you because we had a relationship that I thought was going to go someplace. As it turned out, it didn't. But it had nothing to do with the book. I knew that you were going there to promote your book. I was going there to promote you. I hadn't read your book except for excerpts here and there. Now that I've read the book...
Next question, please.
Did you know, since you hadn't read my book, even by the time we were engaged, did you know that my mother had died in 1999 and there was a lot of issues about a very lucrative estate?
I knew that your mother had passed away. I didn't know what year she passed away. I knew that there were some issues regarding the estate, but not so much, it wasn't about your mother, it's about your father, I thought.
Okay.
But what the issues were exactly, I don't know.
When your mother passed away and your whole family descended on the house, And I cared for them all for a week and produced photographs and art to help prepare for the funeral. Did you tell anyone at that time that you believed that I had hastened her death?
There were some issues, some questions regarding some of the supplements that you had given her, but it was a time of grief, and you're right, you did participate in helping everybody do what people do in those kinds of times. But I can tell you that the issue regarding that didn't come up until a little later on when we take a close look at what precipitated her stroke. That was a long time after. And then my recollection was that you were giving her, against my advice, different kinds of supplements that in bottles and stuff. And I'd ask you not to do that because she had heart problems and she had other kinds of problems, and you were not supposed to be giving her anything else, especially when the supplements
Okay,
were
that's
made.
enough. That's enough. This isn't relevant.
I get it. During my pregnancy, I refused to return to your home unless you agreed to sit down with Pastor Johnson and have him referee our issues. Who is Pastor Johnson?
Pastor Johnson was my mother's pastor at her church.
You had a long-time relationship with this man, is that correct?
My mother had a 40-year relationship with that church, and he was a pastor for, I don't know, the last 5, 6, 7 years at that church, whatever it was.
And we did some counseling with him during my pregnancy, is that correct?
I don't recall, did we?
Yes. Then I also demanded that your next pastor, Pastor Holt of the International Fellowship family, referee one night because I told him I wasn't leaving with you. Do you recall that?
Oh, I remember asking you in his presence, did you believe that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh, and you ran out of the church? So I remember that.
That's your recollection. Were you aware that I carved a professional relationship with Pastor Holt, and then we did a radio show together? Do you recall that?
I know that you're advocating your supernatural foods. That was your agenda rather than Jesus Christ. I know that.
Why was your brother Thomas removed from the home by the state when you were a child?
Who?
Your brother Thomas was removed from the home by the state? Why?
No idea what you're talking about, and even if I did, it would be irrelevant. What are you talking about? That's
Well, we talked.
50 years ago?
Well, we talked about my childhood. I'm asking what yours was like. Your father had a love child with his mistress of 20 years named Lillian. Is she still alive?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained.
So, never mind. After one fight we had and we were out at the Labyrinth Garden.
Objection. I've never fought you.
One disagreement we had, and we were out at the Labyrinth Garden in Gresham, and we were trying to work through that. Do you remember that day at all?
I do not recall the specific day that you're talking about. We were out there a lot of days.
And I said to you that based on what your mother shared with me before her death, that I believed that you had been raped at 8 and possibly by a white police officer. Do you remember that conversation?
What? Absolutely not.
Okay. And in response, you told me that, no, that wasn't it.
He testified he doesn't remember the statement, so
Okay.
how could he respond?
Got it. Who is Sylvan Sivens?
A witch in Hillsboro.
Was she one of the
Same coven you
supervisors
belong to?
for your visitations after the restraining order?
No, because I wouldn't accept her because she's a witch.
I'll move on. Lenny was the next supervisor after Sylvan, is that correct? Lenny Slider, who was here yesterday?
Charles Lenny Slider is Ezekiel's godfather.
I see. And when did he become Ezekiel's godfather?
The day he was born.
I see.
Do you remember?
No, I never met Lenny until we were in Hillsborough. After Lenny admitted
Me?
that he had
Are you
been...
saying under oath?
Stop. Question?
After Lenny admitted that he had been dropping you and Ezekiel off, instead of supervising, who was the next supervisor?
I believe that you tried to have your pedophile boyfriend be the supervisor, but, I wasn't going for that. So that we didn't have a supervisor after that. You would not allow me to see my son whatsoever, and that got into the court systems. Isn't that accurate?
No. When I returned from the domestic violence shelter at 5 months pregnant, why was your brother George there from Detroit?
Ask the question again.
When I returned from the domestic violence shelter, I was by now 5 months pregnant because I'd been there a month. Why was your brother George staying at your home?
I had no idea you were in a domestic violence shelter. I had no idea where you were. All I knew is that you had taken
The
off.
question was, why was Brother George at the home?
My brother George came out to visit his brothers and his sisters. He came to Portland to visit our family, and then he went to California to visit my sister. How is that relevant to anything?
Do you recall the deal that George negotiated to get me to come back from the domestic violence shelter?
Absolutely not. There was no deal. Nobody knew that you were in a domestic violence shelter.
Have you ever owned any pornography?
Some that we shot together.
You've never bought any store-bought pornography?
Some that we shot together.
That's not the question, sir. Have you ever bought any pornography on sale in a store?
He said yes, the things
No.
we bought together.
No, that's not what he said, Your Honor.
I know I can imply an answer for what he's telling, okay? That's for me to determine. It's in the affirmative.
Okay. How many times did you contact CPS after Ezekiel returned from Arizona and your evangelist friend said he was abused?
When Ezekiel was displaying,
The question was, how many times did you contact CPS after I returned from Arizona?
3 times.
3 times. Okay. Do you have any documentation on that from 2008?
I think a witness testified yesterday that she escorted me to CPS.
No, she testified she escorted you to CPS in 2011. We're
Oh,
now
well, you weren't
talking about
specific.
2008.
You asked me, had I ever, after 2000, whatever your date was, how many times did I contact CPS? And I told you 3 times, and I stand by that.
So let me be more specific. After your friend said he believed he had been sexually abused in Arizona, now we're in 2008.
That's not what he said.
He suspected
As a
Ezekiel
matter
had
of
been
fact, he
abused.
called me from New York
Okay,
this morning.
stop, it's hearsay. It's
Okay.
not admissible what somebody said in Arizona.
Oh, he testified that when the child came back, his evangelist friend examined him and decided that the child might have been abused in Arizona. This was August
Accurate.
2008.
You said sexually abused.
Abused, period. Did you call CPS and tell him in 2008 my son was abused while she left the state with him?
No, I told my attorney.
Someone testified yesterday, forgive me, I don't recall whether it was you or Arliss, that the reason CPS would not take you seriously is because they had contacted the psychologist at Beckman Creek Primary School and he did not feel there were any red flags to merit a report. Is that correct?
She also said that you worked with those people on a daily basis as a volunteer.
I don't recall that, but so
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
Arliss apparently testified yesterday that when she went to talk to CPS herself, they told her the reason they were not interested in pursuing this is that they had contacted the school psychologist where Ezekiel had been enrolled for 2 years, and he said there's no red flags.
Okay, thank you. That was the woman's testimony.
Yeah.
So what's the question?
The question is, who was the psychologist from Beckman Creek, do you know?
You have to ask Arliss.
Did you have a relationship with him?
With him?
Yes.
Who?
The school psychologist while
have
Ezekiel
no
was
idea.
enrolled there for 2 years.
You have to ask Arliss. I have no idea. I wasn't there because I had a restraining
No,
order.
the question was, do you know the man?
No.
Okay.
was there ever a court order in place that said you could not volunteer at Ezekiel's school or participate in his education or call his teacher or meet with the
Yeah, there was a
schools?
restraining order that kept me from 100 yards from his school, if my recollection is. I was not supposed to contact him, not supposed to come to your property within 100 feet or 100 yards or 100 miles, whatever it was,
That became
or
in
his
place.
school.
Don't interrupt.
I'm sorry.
Isn't that the restraining order that you had? To keep me from having anything to do with my son any place on earth.
Yes, that restraining order went
what
into
reason,
place
I
in
don't know.
October of 2010, but he had been enrolled in
Are
Beckman
you
Creek.
asking me, did I violate the restraining order by contacting?
Stop. Ms. Martin, ask the question, please.
Prior to that restraining order going into effect, Ezekiel was in Beckman
At
Creek.
what point in time?
It-
State your times and your context, please.
Yes, sir. October 2010, a restraining order was put in place, and yes, you were no longer allowed access to the school. Previous to that, he had been enrolled in that school for a year and a half with no court order saying you could not interact there. Did you interact at all?
My recollection is that you called me and said that Ezekiel was having some kind of a Christmas play and only one parent could attend, and he wanted me to attend, and so I went.
So the school was available to you if you wanted to know more about his life.
Only after you allowed me to come and visit that school, and I went. Any opportunity I would ever have to have time with my son, I took it, absolutely.
So I'm still trying to clarify this point. Up until October 2010, when a restraining order was put in place, was there ever a court order that said you could not be actively involved in the child's school?
No, you have a
Okay, the answer is yes or no. Was there or wasn't there?
Repeat
Was there or wasn't there a court order restraining you from going to the child's school?
There was a court order restraining me from going to the child's school, absolutely.
Okay, all right. That's the answer he's given. Can you provide information to the contrary?
That there's a court order that said he couldn't be involved with the school?
Yeah. Can you provide proof?
He went there?
Can you provide proof to the contrary that there was no such court order?
No.
Okay.
Why did you go to the school for the Christmas event if you felt you were restrained from being there legally? Isn't that a violation of a court order then?
The court order on that one, there's been several court orders and restraining orders, as you've mentioned yesterday in court. That when it expired, I was not permitted to go there. So I
Okay.
didn't go there. You called me and asked that would I attend the Christmas play. And absolutely I'll attend I couldn't believe that I was being invited to have anything to do in his life at his school. And I took full advantage of it. And yes, I went.
That was Christmas of 2009, correct? And the restraining order didn't become in place until October of 2010,
No,
correct?
that was a new restraining order.
I get
You
that.
filed them every other week.
Thank you for acknowledging that. I have advocated my tush off. When I was living at the Lighthouse in Hillsborough, shortly after I got a restraining order in place, I had 2 police officers and 3 paramedics on my door because someone had called CPS and told them I was beating the child because he had a bump on his head. Was that someone you, Mr. Gibson?
I remember that Ezekiel had some kind of a serious bump on his head, and it looked to me like it was some kind of physical violence, that maybe you or Patrick had beat him up, and you bet I called.
Okay, so you're admitting to calling CPS. They responded immediately. I had a frightening pack of professionals on my doorstep,
As you will again.
and they examined the child, went toddler learning to walk with a bump on his head, and they left. But CPS responded immediately to your request. Why do you think they're not taking you seriously now?
Oh, who said they're not?
I believe your witnesses. Arliss for sure said they didn't want they didn't want to open a case.
That was then. This is now.
Oh, okay. Is that a threat?
Objection.
Just ask the
Your Honor.
question.
Okay. It was my understanding from just about everyone in your family that your niece Corinne and your nephew Gerald Jack had been living with your sister and they got molested and beaten by her first
Objection, Your Honor,
husband.
this is
Got to hear
40
the
years
question
ago.
first. I don't know what the question is that you're objecting to. Obviously, you know it, but I don't. So ask the question in full and pause.
Is it true your niece and nephew were molested and or battered when they lived with your sister and her first husband?
Objection.
Basis for the objection.
This is something that was 30 years ago, and I wasn't privy to that. I was not at my sister's house. I did not live with her, so I have no direct knowledge of what happened in that house. Do you?
Okay, so the objection sustained.
The purpose of my question, Your Honor, is he has tried to put on the record that people that have been sexually abused are too banged up to parent, and this woman who's been sexually abused, been to prison, is living in his house and going to be there if he gets any kind of residential visitation. Do I not have a right to explore her background, since he's saying my background negates me from being an appropriate parent?
So this woman's living in his household now?
Yes, he's admitted that over and over.
Well,
No. This woman lives in the bottom quarter. We have a house it's got a top
Can we
floor.
move on, Your Honor?
no,
Okay.
I want to hear
The
the
house-
point here because it may be relevant. So
The house is-
Stop. I'm reconsidering my sustaining the objection because there may be relevance to this. If in fact this lady is living under the same roof, whether it's downstairs, upstairs, or in the maid's quarters, because the statement has been made by Mr. Gibson that mother may be having psychological issues because she was sexually abused as a child, but then he would allow an individual to live in the same household as Ezekiel, who also was sexually abused as a child. So for that purpose, it's relevant.
Thank you.
There's no evidence that she...
Stop. Okay, the question was asked. Now answer the question, please.
Repeat the question.
Was she molested by your sister's first husband, who your sister consequently dumped because of the molestation?
I don't know.
Why wasn't your brother parenting his own children? Why were they living with your sister in California?
Irrelevant, Your Honor.
Yesterday you wanted to paint over his criminal record.
He's objecting on relevancy.
Okay.
What's your response?
Yesterday...
No,
when I-
talk to me.
Oh, Your Honor.
Convince me that it's relevant.
Okay, we discussed his brother yesterday, who I said had a criminal record and a heroin addiction. And he tried to paint over that he's a swell guy. I'm trying to determine why this swell guy didn't raise his own children. There must have been some problem in his life that his children had to go live elsewhere.
Why is the brother relevant?
Well, because he's still in his life, and because he tried to paint him as, just because he had a couple of bumps with the legal system, he was a really functional guy. That's not my recollection, and I'm trying to dispute that inaccurate testimony by showing the man wasn't even raising his own children. So what were his issues if it wasn't heroin and criminal behavior?
Okay, it's relevant because Mr. Gibson opened the door on that issue as to the character of his brother, so you can ask the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you need help with the question?
My brother has 4 children, and they all love him dearly.
Okay. Even though he didn't raise some of them.
He's raised all of them.
Yesterday you mentioned that I had approached you. I believe that it was in reference to our discussion about you moving into my home, and that I made some noise about we're both spending so much money on attorneys, wouldn't it be better to make this thing go away? Do you remember saying that yesterday?
Absolutely, and I may have an email to that.
So have you ever seen me come to this court with an attorney that I've paid for?
Objection. I don't understand the relevancy of that.
Well, the relevancy is she hasn't paid a penny for lawyers.
So why would I come to you and say, let's stop it because this is costing me too much? You've spent $4,000 on Ms. Fong-Uribe, cheated her out of $8,000.
Objection.
Yeah, just ask the
So
question.
it's been expensive for you, but why did you deem it's expensive for me? I have represented myself the whole way.
The only recollection I have about that is that when we were going on an outing after Ezekiel had threatened to kill himself if we didn't get along, you invited me to go to a movie in the park. in Wilsonville. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay. You also wanted to spend the 4th of July. At first we were going to go to the OMSI, and then you found out that there was a 4th of July celebration at Waterfront Park, and you wanted to do that instead. And we did. And then you said, since we're getting along so well, why don't we draft a letter to Judge Ruley saying that we're reconciling, things are going good, and we don't need to do this as it's costing too much money. And I says I would think about it. That's my recollection. You remember it differently than that?
I'll talk about it when it's my turn.
It is your turn.
No, not to testify. Is there a court order in place currently for you to pay child support for your son?
In 2 states illegally.
Illegally. Could you expound on that?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was ordered by Judge Ruley to pay back child support and by a certain date, and I produced a cashier's check for $4,500. You elected not to show up that day, and Judge Ruley ruled that the balance of what I had, from my understanding, because you didn't show up, was gone. Then I get notices, and I have them there, and I think I entered them into evidence, as an exhibit, that you are also claiming child support from the state of Oregon. So you're claiming illegally child support from 2 different states. Is that not accurate?
No.
It's
So,
not?
In answer to my question,
There is...
Stop. This is not the way this hearing is going to be conducted. She asks you a question, you answer the question. You do not have the right to batter and continue with this dialogue between the 2 of you. Okay? It's going to stop. Otherwise,
Okay.
I'm going to continue this hearing to a date in the future. I'm not going to tolerate this any longer. She asks a question, you answer the question.
Repeat the
You do
question,
not
please.
elaborate any further.
is there a court order in place for child support in Clark County, Washington?
Yes or no is the answer.
Yes.
Are you current on that court order?
No.
You testified yesterday that you have a house full of children, or actually you qualified them as teenagers, and a newborn baby, as well as your niece Corinne, all living in your home that you are caring for. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a witness in the courtroom right now.
Answer is yes or no?
The answer is yes.
Are you helping these people financially?
Yes.
But you can't afford to pay your child support for your own son?
I haven't seen my son in 14 months.
So it doesn't matter if he has enough food or clothes or
Yesterday, you testified that I continue to buy him clothes, toys, whatever he needs. Wasn't that your testimony yesterday?
No, but
It wasn't?
we'll get to it. I fled your home for Tucson on May 31st, 2008. You did not file your motion until August 8th. Why did you wait months?
I had no idea where you were. But I did file, when I heard from a Mr. Ken Calvin, that you had propositioned him for money to move to go probably to Tucson. That's what filed with the court.
Mr. Calvin's statement said he contacted you the day after I left.
Correct.
So you filed, your testimony is you filed immediately after
I
he
gave that
contacted you.
information to my attorney, Debbie Fongi-Reeby.
So you heard that I was fleeing the state. You had no idea where I was. You didn't call an Amber Alert. You didn't call CPS. You called an attorney.
Absolutely.
Did you perceive that your mother and I got along?
Sometimes.
Who cared for her the last 3 months of her life?
I did.
You sure?
Am I sure? A lot of people did. I did. This young lady in the courtroom did.
Did I?
Yes.
I was living in the home while you were working full time, and no one else was living there.
A lot
Did
of
I
people
care for
helped.
her?
Yes, you did. You
Thank you.
participated in caring for her.
But you believe I tried to murder her with herbs.
I know you did.
Okay? So, you believed, you just stated it very clearly for the record, that I murdered your mother by giving her supplements in combination with her medications. When you moved into my home, dates. On September 13th, 2010, you were still on medications for your diabetes after your life-threatening trip to the hospital, but you let us give you herbs and supplements and elixirs, did you not? Yes or no, please?
The situation was...
Yes or no, please?
Yes.
You testified yesterday that the reason you suspected that the child I was carrying was Patrick's was because you saw him in the Chrysler New Yorker you had given me. I was driving in the Chrysler and Patrick was with me while I was pregnant, so you became suspicious that he might be the father. Do you recall saying that yesterday?
That's not what I said.
Please clarify your testimony.
What I said was, when you had disappeared, and I had heard that somebody had told me that they'd seen Patrick and you in the Chrysler New Yorker that I had bought for you. And so when I hadn't seen you for a few days, I called you and you would not answer your phone. So I called Patrick to see if he had knew where you were. He said no, he didn't know where you were, but I was on the property and saw the New Yorker at his trailer. So when I opened the door of the trailer, I saw you both in the bed together. And that's when you kicked me with a karate kick to my chest and bruised my ribs. And that's when I believed that the baby probably wasn't mine. As you guys had, at that time, a 16-year relationship? That you had fled from Patrick because he was abusing you? You write about it in your book.
Can I get back to my question? So you are saying that during the time I was pregnant, and we've established that I became pregnant around June of 2003, that you believed someone saw me and Patrick in this Chrysler and you saw it at his trailer in Gresham. Is that correct?
Absolutely, that's correct. However...
No, thank you. My DMV report will reflect that Chrysler New Yorker was taken from me in 2002 because
Do you have a question or you want to testify?
I'm going to get to the question.
Okay, get to it then.
The car was taken from me because the car you gave me had stolen plates on it, and that was in 2002. Can you explain how you saw me in that car in 2003? No? Okay. I'd like to reflect for the record, he nodded his head no.
Let's see the DMV record. Do you have it?
No. Next question, please.
Do you remember 4 years ago? We were living in your Vancouver apartment. And I started a campaign to put a state-of-the-art greenhouse dome garden on the White House lawn. Do you remember?
You mean the spaceship that you want to have on the White House dome, the White House lawn? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely, I remember it. You're still trying to do that.
You were the only person that supported me in that. Do you remember that?
I don't know if I was the only person that supported you in that.
You told me, and I quote, Martin, you might just pull this off. Do you
You
remember
might.
that?
You still might.
So you didn't think I was crazy, and you later went to work for my dome company. Is that correct?
I think that the garden
Yes or no?
domes, yes.
Thank you. You have called me crazy, loco, off my rocker in this courtroom in front of all of us so far. So I'm still confused, Mr. Gibson, on when exactly in our relationship you decided that I was mentally ill, insane, off my rocker, whatever. When exactly in the chronology of our 10 years together did you come to understand that?
I don't know, but early on.
Do you think it's appropriate to call me Satan in front of Ezekiel? Is that appropriate parenting?
I've never done that.
Have you ever called me fucking bitch in front of Ezekiel?
Never done that.
Have you ever told him that the world is coming to an end and mommy is going to hell?
I've never done that.
If I provide email evidence, would you be interested in changing your testimony?
But that's, you said in front of Ezekiel.
If I provide evidence, would you be interested in...
In front of Ezekiel in an email?
Yes
How
or no?
would you to do that?
Who paid for your 2 trips to see naturopath Dr. Rosa?
I don't know.
It wasn't you.
No.
Who paid to have Bob work on your car and live at our house for 5 days? Was it you?
Both of us did. I think both of us did. That's my recollection.
Who paid for your food and herbs and the cleansing products while you were living in our home?
I don't know.
When you lived with us, did we make you pay rent, utilities, anything?
When you lived with me, did you pay rent or utilities or anything?
Please answer the question, yes or no, Mr. Gibson.
No, that wasn't the agreement. The agreement was that I would come out there and that you...
Thank you. I'd like to move on.
Good.
Okay, you're filing... Okay, you're filing that I received yesterday about you wanting full immediate custody of Ezekiel. That was filed on October 31st, 2011. You claim in your document that your complaints about Patrick McEachern sexually assaulting Ezekiel are on record with the Washington County, Oregon Child Protective Services. That's what your document says. Do you have any documents to show us to confirm that?
I have a witness in this courtroom that took me there.
No document from this agency to show a judge I'm trying to advocate for my
Do
son?
you have a document that says I didn't?
No, answer the question,
No.
please, sir.
No paperwork. In your very first filing that compelled me to turn over the child, you called me psychotic, you made noise about my drug addiction, and then you asked the court to leave me as the primary residential custodial parent. Why?
Providing that you could take a drug test that shows that you were not using drugs. You waited 40 days to take that test. After 30 days, the test is no longer relevant.
Objection, Your Honor. He's not an expert in this field, and we're going to discuss that later.
That's sustained.
Okay. So, part of this case, as Judge Ruley explained to us yesterday morning, was about parentage. You wanted to establish your parentage. And recently, after 3 solid years of litigation, Judge Ruley gave you permission to put your name on the birth certificate for Ezekiel Wardell Gibson. Have you done that?
No, I have not.
Do you have a valid driver's license, Mr. Gibson?
No, I do not.
In 2008, Judge Stonke told you to get a driver's license or not drive with the child in the car, and you told him it was in the works. Is it still in the works?
It was at that time, yes.
And what happened to that effort to get
I'm
it
no longer
legal?
driving the car.
Really?
Yes,
You
really.
have not driven since 2008. You've never driven with Ezekiel in the car?
I don't recall.
You have lots of testimony here that you picked him up because I didn't have a car.
Do you have a driver's license?
No, I
That's
don't
not the
drive.
question now. You don't get to ask the questions. Just answer them, please.
I'm not currently, I do not currently have a valid driver's license.
At the time of your criminal trial, Ezekiel was in first grade at Beckman Creek Elementary School. Do you know what time he got out of school when he was in first grade?
I would imagine sometime in the afternoon.
And what time was the verdict read in your criminal trial on a weekday afternoon?
I believe they were in session for about 45 minutes.
It was in the afternoon when the verdict was read. You and your witnesses opined that perhaps the reason me and Mr. McEachern fled the courtroom and didn't stay for the ruling was because we were afraid we were guilty of perjury. Is that what you were trying to say to the court yesterday?
I didn't say that.
Is that what your witness Jordan relayed to the court yesterday?
She related what she heard in the hallway. We asked your attorney, Catherine Glasson, why you were not there. She had no clue.
So it never crossed your mind that the two adults that live with the minor child might need to leave to receive him from school?
I had no idea whether he was going to school or not. He's not going now,
Okay.
is he?
I would like to reserve the right to bring this witness back later, but I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor.
Okay, anything further, Mr. Gibson?
Not at this time.
Okay, you can step down then. Mr. Gibson indicated yesterday that he was the last witness he was going to call, so we're going to start on Ms. Martin's case. Call your first witness.
I'm going to testify first, Your Honor, and it's probably going to take me hours.
Well, we've got all day.
Okay? I'm prepared. I'm ready to testify, Your Honor.
Okay. Do you solemnly swear and affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the whole truth, so help you God?
I do, Your Honor.
Please be seated.
Can I bring my coat? There was a great deal of discussion yesterday about my issues with sleep deprivation. I did not deny it. I am very sleep deprived today. I had a child to care for until late last night, and I had 8 hours of lawyering to do before I arrived here this morning. So this is me in sleep deprivation, Your Honor, and I'm struggling. So I felt the best way to deliver my testimony, because as you're probably starting to get, this is 10 years of angst in police actions, and the last 3 has required at least 20 hearings and a whole lot of paperwork. So I felt the best way to deliver my testimony and my state of exhaustion was to read the first declaration I put onto the record after I got back in August of 2008. Do you have any objection to rereading my testimony? Because I'm too tired to remember all that.
Well, you're not going to read from a declaration in regards to your testimony.
All right.
Testify, but I'm not going to allow you to read from a, how many pages is that declaration?
13.
13-page declaration at this time.
Okay. So I'll do the best I can to recall it all and spit it out on the record.
Go ahead.
We've talked extensively about my abusive childhood. Obviously, I've never denied it. I wrote about it, and in my book, I write about working at those issues for years, voluntarily seeking counseling, voluntarily getting myself into incest groups, voluntarily looking for therapists that I could afford or that the state would provide. I met Mr. Gibson, as he stated, in November of 2001. In the very first week of December, we had our first real blowout, and he called me and was screaming at me that I was Satan and the Antichrist and Lucifer. He apparently had finally determined that my definition of God was different than his, and it got very ugly. I told him to get lost, didn't want anything to do with him, and kept him at bay for several weeks. He kept trying to negotiate his way back into my life, and I finally told him if he would show up at my church on Christmas Eve and sit through the service so he could have a realistic understanding of how I worship God, then I would consider talking to him again. He did show up at my church. He rather enjoyed the service, so things got a little easier. We got a little bit closer on our arguments about God, and we went forward in our relationship. Very poor decision on my part, which I can talk about later. So it's 2000 now. That was Christmas of 2001. Before the end of January 2002, I have moved in with Mr. Gibson. I have taken over the care of his 93-year-old mother, who has had at least one stroke at that point and been debilitated for about, I believe, 8 years, because she was 85 when she had her first stroke. Mr. Gibson was in December of 2001 when I met him. He was a salesman for electric mobility. He sold electric wheelchairs for a living. He was the #1 salesman in the country and made $10,000 in December of 2001. And we had a very generous, delightful Christmas. And then in January of 2002, Mr. Gibson and I took out a $10,000 loan from a friend of mine under video surveillance cameras in a bank. And we both committed to her how this loan was going to be repaid. The reason I bring it up is because Mr. Gibson's $10,000 from December was all gone. He bought his mother a $6,000 electric wheelchair. He bought me, as he said, diamonds, and had a grand time. And by January, we're out of money, and we had to borrow money to pay the bills. And some of that money I spent to go forward on my book. The wheelchair industry has not gone down. It's a booming industry.
This is, how's any of this relevant?
Because he left that job for some reason.
All
He
right.
left a very lucrative job where he was top in the country, making $10,000 a month, and that job went away. So now he's unemployed, and I'm helping to care for his mother, and she dies. I did a lot of work to accommodate his family during the funeral, etc. I never gave her any herbal supplements. I would have, but I didn't have any money for such things. And Osceola Gibson is this man's mother and one of the most fierce human beings you'll ever met. She would not have swallowed anything. She wasn't interested in swallowing, even if I could have afforded to provide it for her. So that is my testimony. I did not murder his mother. To the contrary, when she had her next massive stroke at the nursing home it must have been late February, because she hung on for a week after that. Late February of 2002, she goes off to her daycare. She has a place where she spends her days, and they care for her, and she's been there a long time. She has a massive stroke, and they call. Mr. Gibson is besides himself, and I kind of take over the negotiations with the doctors at the daycare. I have a lot of experience with hospice. I try and explain to Mr. Gibson that what they are recommending is no more...
Okay, move on, please.
Okay, I didn't kill her. The doctors worked with me. They didn't think I killed her. They actually even told Mr. Gibson she had improved. They had noticed there must have been someone else in the house because her state of being had improved. Dr. Johnson, actually, I need to back up for a minute. Shortly after I moved into the home, Gerald Jack Gibson, his nephew, and his girlfriend, Aaliyah, I do not know her last name, showed up at the house one day to visit Osceola while I was home with her and he was at work. I had no idea what the relationship between all these people is. I've only known him, only lived with him less than a month. And they want to visit Grandma. I let them in. I'm really sweet and to everybody. They all have a good time. I have no idea that there's a problem. When Mr. Gibson came home from work that night and found out that his nephew, who he had a restraining order against up until a few days, it had run out a few days previous to that, when he found out that I had let this young man into the home to visit his grandmother, he went berserk. He raged at me and he raged at her. Now she was a stroke victim. It was a lot of work for her to get up from her walker.
Okay, what's the relevancy?
Because I believe this is the event that hastened her death. It drove me out of the home.
Objection,
I'm not here to
Your Honor.
investigate Miss Gibson's death.
Okay, well, I'm going to
He
tie
made a
in.
comment that he thought you killed her. You've made a comment that I did not kill her. That's where it sits.
Okay, but I'm leading up to how Pastor Johnson came into our life, and then we're going to go into counseling with him when I become pregnant.
Why is that relevant?
Because we had domestic violence going on through.
Well, let's get to that then.
Okay.
Because,
All right, so I have a relationship with Pastor Johnson now because he's officiated at the funeral. There's another reason why I want to enter that into the record.
enter what?
What happened with with Pastor Johnson around her funeral?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Objection, Your Honor. I have seen.
Overruled. Overruled.
When he had this explosion about his nephew showing up at the house and he was so abusive to me, I told Osceola...
What does abusive to me mean?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. He was screaming at me, terrorizing me,
Objection.
frightening me.
Screaming, terrorizing,
Frightening me. Didn't lay a hand on me.
and frightening you.
I felt very intimidated by his continued behaviors over these people stopping by the house. All I knew, they were family, I let them in, and all of a sudden I'm under attack by him constantly because I let them in. And so was Osceola.
Third-degree black belt.
So I went to Osceola and I said, I'm moving out. He's too mean. And she said to me, and I quote, if you do, I'll be abused in your absence. So I called her church, which I had a relationship with, and I left a message 4 days in a row for Pastor Johnson that she needed an advocate. She believed she would be abused in my absence, and I would stay until the church sent someone to advocate for her. May I continue with the story, or are you feeling it's irrelevant?
Other than he went berserk, screaming, terrorizing, and frightening me, I felt intimidated by his attack. He didn't lay a hand on me. That's the only relevance I've seen so far. So if you're going to continue to narrate a story that doesn't provide any evidence in regards to the domestic violence issue, then do not do so.
This is not evidence that I felt there was domestic violence, that I was leaving, but I wasn't going to leave an elderly woman behind to deal with him on her own.
Okay, you've said that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted. Okay, so she passed away, and he's unemployed and depressed, and it was a difficult time. And that went on for a year. And we were estranged. I'm over living at Stacy's again, and I realize I haven't had a menstrual period in months, and I'm thinking I'm either in menopause or I'm pregnant, and I go have a test. The result is positive. I have not had sexual relations with anyone but this man for over, let's see, at this point, a year. And my previous relationship was not with Mr. McEachran, it was with another man. So no doubt in my mind, unless it's an immaculate conception, that it's Mr. Gibson's. I came to him, as he said, with an envelope with a couple of baby booties and a pregnancy test, and told him I was pregnant with his child. He couldn't have been more excited. This is a man who's wanted children all his life, never worked with any of his girlfriends. He is through the roof that I'm telling him I'm pregnant with his child. It's my recollection that because of the extreme need, we were both financially challenged at that point. We had a conversation, time to grow up, get busy. He agreed to go back to work to support me. I was 46 years old, a high-risk pregnancy, and we both decided that I should focus on staying home, staying healthy, and getting through the pregnancy. He would support me. I would be a stay-at-home mom. That was our agreement. That's what I committed to. So I had no income for the coming years. I depended on Mr. Gibson to hold up his end of the deal. He ran out and got a job. He can get a job by sundown on almost any given day. He's an amazing salesman. He got a job, I think that's when he started with Northwest Business Associates as a credit repair, whatever. He was trying his hardest to provide, and I was staying home. But it was difficult. I had no wheels, and I was a high-risk pregnancy, and I needed help. So he invited his brother to move into the house, who was on heroin at the time, was homeless, had issues, and I'll just say it was a nightmare for me and move on. So now I'm 4 months pregnant. I had another one of those incidents where Mr. Gibson was chasing me around the house, screaming that I was a whore, screaming that it wasn't his baby.
Objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Screaming that I was Satan. And although I am very qualified to fight even this ex-Black Panther, I did not want to fight anyone as a pregnant woman. I am highly trained. I know what to do in a situation like that. Go out the door. And being pregnant, I've never felt more vulnerable. In spite of my Taekwondo skills, it was very intimidating to be under that, with that going on, being pregnant. So I chose to run out the door. I did not fight. I left. I went to a domestic violence shelter in North Portland, and I lived there for 3 weeks. But the shelter was short on funding, so I had to leave every morning at 7 o'clock and keep myself busy walking around in the middle of the winter until I could get back into the shelter in the evening. And as a high-risk pregnancy, I couldn't handle it on the street all day long. Mr. Gibson was remorseful. His brother came to town, and his brother negotiated what I wanted, which was if all the pornography left the house, I would come back.
Overruled.
So now I'm nearly 5 months pregnant, and I'm back to living.
Mr. Gibson, your objections are not legally well-founded. You have an opportunity to testify to rebut whatever she says, but just because you don't agree with what she says is not a basis for a legal objection.
Okay, Your Honor.
Okay? So just keep that in mind.
I will.
So she can testify what she wants as long as it's relevant. If you object because you don't like the answer, it's never going to be sustained. You have the right to testify as to what you think actually occurred. Continue, please.
Okay, so I'm tired. I'm trying to keep up. I was 5 months pregnant. I've moved back in with him. His brother George, left, a few days later. And we're in this stress ball again. And when I was 7 months pregnant, we had another incident of him screaming about who the father was, calling me Satan, and this time he tried to bully his way through my bed. I had my own bedroom now, downstairs in a waterbed. We were preparing for the birth, which I wanted to do at home. Where am I going to live? I need my own nest with this baby, so he set me up a beautiful bedroom downstairs that was mine. And we're having this battle. And I am holding the door, 7 months pregnant, on my end, trying to keep a 260-pound man out of the room. And I was injured strained my back in that exchange, ran around him, headed out the door, and I went to live in a church on 35th and Yam Hill that is a homeless shelter for families. So I lived on the top bunk for a month and spent Christmas of 2003 in that shelter. And it was the same situation as the last one. I had to walk the street all day, pregnant, and then climb to my bunk bed at night. But I hung in there for a month because I really wasn't motivated to go back to live with Mr. Gibson. You only got 30 days in that shelter, and I didn't have a job and a home and a whole new life at the end of the 30 days, so regrettably went back to live with Mr. Gibson on Harold Street. Between then, I was now pushing 8 months pregnant. Between then and the time I gave birth, I lived with him for about a month, and then we had another blowout, and I ended up sleeping on the floor over at Stacy Cohen's house, which was a mile away, my closest friend who I'd been living with when I met him. And my due date is impending, and I called Mr. Gibson, and I asked him to meet me at a buffet on 82nd Street, not far from his Harold Street house. We met for dinner, and I told him that if he was willing to behave, I would consider inviting him to the birth. He agreed. I went back to live at Stacy's house, and the very next day, I went into labor. I was at a Value Village shopping for baby clothes, and my water broke. I called Stacy. I called Wardell. He told everyone at the office. He left, raced over to pick me up, and we called the hospital, and they said, come. I'd like to share at this point that once I got out of the domestic violence shelter when I was nearly 5 months pregnant, I now had the state of Oregon in my life from now on because I was pregnant, I was a high risk, and I had been in a domestic violence shelter. So now the state of Oregon was sending a nurse to visit me on Harold Street. So I, against my desire, the state of Oregon had entered our life, and they were monitoring my pregnancy. Okay, so we're back to me going into labor. Mr. Gibson and Ms. Cohen were my labor coaches. It was a 24 hours worth of labor.
Okay, let's just move on, would you please?
Okay, the point was he was fantastic at the birth. Couldn't have done it without him. So I'm hopeful that things are going to change. But I still haven't decided what I'm doing. I was up for 2 days giving birth. I was in the hospital for 3 days where I got no rest. So I was definitely in sleep deprivation when we were preparing to leave the hospital 5 days later. As we were packing up to leave the room, my cell phone rang. And it was the state of Oregon. And he answered it. The person on the other end of the line said something about domestic violence. That's all I overheard were the words domestic violence, and I just cringed, and he went off. He starts screaming at whoever's on the other end of the line, and I don't know who it is. Well, it turns out it was the state of Oregon on the line, and they threatened him back. And then they asked to speak to me. And I was told in my state of exhaustion after 5 days that I had to meet with an Oregon State social worker that afternoon at 1 o'clock, and Mr. Gibson was not invited. And that meeting would take place at Stacy Cohen's house, 79th and Powell is where she lived at the time. Mr. Gibson dropped me off there. Ms. Cohen was present. 2 Oregon State social workers showed up. I was told during that meeting with Ms. Cohen present and she'll be testifying tomorrow, that if there was ever another incident of domestic violence with Mr. Gibson and I did not flee, that I was in danger of losing my child to the state. They went on to tell me during that meeting that should I need to flee, that I was entitled to $1,500 from the state of Oregon, and they gave me the contact information to pursue that should I need it. Then I was told, in my extreme state of exhaustion, we're on day 5 now, that Mr. Gibson and I had to meet with a counselor in the next 48 hours, and it was on me to find one and arrange it. I agreed. So I found a psychologist in Lake Oswego who was Jewish, and he worked out of his home, and I couldn't pay him, but he agreed to meet with us, and Mr. Gibson and I rolled in there like 24 hours later when I had the newborn child with me. That encounter in this poor elderly man's home became so explosive that I took the baby to the bathroom and I told the psychologist, call the police. I'm not leaving with him. Mr. Gibson and the counselor were out in the living room. I stayed in the bathroom with the child for 45 minutes. I have no idea what they discussed, but eventually the two of them came to the bathroom. Mr. Gibson apologized, agreed to shift his behaviors, and the counselor tried to convince me to go home with Mr. Gibson. I still wanted police action. The psychologist wanted me to go home with him and get some rest, which I did. So he took me back to Stacy's that evening. Stacy now had a new roommate who was renting out part of her home that was not happy that a woman with domestic violence and a newborn baby was going to be crashing in the spare room. So I made the decision to go back to Mr. Gibson's. Ezekiel and I went there that night. The waterbed was too hot. We determined it was dangerous for the baby, and Mr. Gibson set out to build me a whole new nest upstairs that was going to be mine and the child's nursery. And we dug in to co-parent this child. It went pretty well. The first few months went really well. He was depressed, watching too much television. We didn't have enough money, but, you know, for all we'd been through, I was just thrilled that he was basically just leaving me alone. Me and the baby had all our alone time upstairs. Things were going quite well. But then about the 5 or 6 month mark, the accusations of Satan, you're a whore, you're still sleeping with Patrick, and the broken record started over and over and over again. And one evening, when Ezekiel was 10 months old, I had Ezekiel in my arms as Mr. Gibson was chasing me around the house, calling me Satan, accusing me of being a whore, threatening to murder me, and I chose to run around him. I was barefoot, it was raining, it was a Sunday night, and I ran to the neighbors. Now, the neighbor that lives behind him has been a longtime friend of Mr. Gibson's, and it was her testimony, or her statement to me and his, that they had dated briefly before, right before I met him, but didn't work out. They're still neighbors, buddies. So I go to her. I've spoken to her in the past. I know she had a ride while she was dating him. I figured she's going to help me. She did. She called the police. Mr. Gibson came over, delivered my shoes and my cell phone, a few articles of clothing, and he left. I called the police. The next morning, I fled to Hillsborough. My business partner, Louise Bouchard, at the time, worked for Washington County Corrections. She arranged for me to live in the Lighthouse, which was a beautiful 3,000 square foot home on an acre that was a counseling center, about 3 blocks from the courthouse in Hillsborough. And my arrangement was I would take care of the place, keep it clean, etc. And there was a room where Ezekiel and I could stay and live there. We just kind of had to disappear when there were clients during the day. It was a big, beautiful place, kitchen, play area. We lived there in return for my labor for 10 months. During this time is when we had all this going on with the restraining order. You've heard all about that at length. I'm just going to move on.
How old was Ezekiel at that point?
He was, well, I fled when I was 10 months. And then the supervised visits started, and Ezekiel was 1. When the supervised visits started on February 12th, 2005. And I know that because it was Mr. Gibson's birthday, and I decorated the whole house so that he could celebrate his birthday with his son for his supervised visitation. So the child was about to turn 1 the next month. It was February 12th, Mr. Gibson's birthday, and that's when the supervised visits started.
Those were set up to the Oregon court,
Yes.
Washington County.
Yes, sir. Sylvan Simmons was the first designated supervisor. She did this for a living for Washington County. She was a friend of Miss Bouchard's. She ran the nonprofit that paid for the lighthouse that I was living in, and she volunteered to supervise the visits for free. And long story short, unfortunately, Miss Sylvan felt so threatened by some of her phone calls and email exchanges with Mr. Gibson that she backed out. Louise Bouchard, my business partner, who at the time was the volunteer coordinator for Washington County Corrections. I'll let her clarify all that when she testifies this afternoon. So she agreed, as a professional in this county, in this field, to take over as a supervisor. And in her position there, she trained hundreds of interns on how to do exactly this kind of work. Mr. Gibson said okay to her taking over that capacity. So then we went through a number of supervisors. At first, I believe the first one was his friend Kathy Reed, and I agreed, and that went well for a while until one day Miss Reed showed up to pick up Ezekiel for a visit, and she wanted permission for her and Mr. Gibson to take the child out of state. And I said no, and my no wasn't received very gracefully. So I started being concerned that Miss Reed was not an appropriate supervisor, that she was, dancing to his drum. And I said, I'm not comfortable with this anymore. So then we mutually agreed on Lenny Slider, who now all of a sudden is designated the child's godfather. I liked Lenny. I had met him, I believe, somewhere in that time frame. I had met him once at Mr. Gibson's business, and I really liked the man. I said, okay, we can do this. Had a couple of visits, and then something about Lenny's behavior started to disturb me, so I flat out asked him details about the supervised visit, and he admitted that he had just dropped Wardell and the child off per Mr. Gibson's request and was not aware that he was supposed to stay the whole time. And after admitting that, I made it really clear to Mr. Slider what the court order was and that he needed to stay for the entire visit, and I allowed this to happen another time or two. And then Mr. Slider started to have challenges with his schedule. So he's the one that started to back out. It was not working well. So that didn't go well either. So the Lighthouse lost their funding, and I was forced to move out of there. I lived there for 10 months, so see if I can do the math. I moved in there in January of '05. So by October of '05, that facility had lost its funding, and I had to move. I cut a deal to move into a house in John's Landing, a $500,000 house, and in return for me helping to prepare this house for sale, I had to stay up at night and do repairs and whatever. I had free rent. There was a hot tub, playground, basketball court, lots of fun, near parks, etc. So this is where we lived, and I had the court order adjusted so that Mr. Gibson could pick up the child for his supervised visits at the Starbucks right down the street instead of us going all the way to the last location. So the court order was changed to reflect that I'm now living in St. John's. And it was during this time that the police were still trying to find him. I had, set out in June of this year to hold him in contempt for the threatening phone calls and the emails, and they had not, the Hillsborough police had chased him for months and not been able to find him. Well, I know his schedule. I know where he goes to church. I know where he's going to be to pick up the child. So I now get the Portland police involved. And they start networking with the Hillsborough police because there is, the police report indicates they've recommended he be arrested, but nobody can find him. And the Hillsborough police worked tirelessly for months, so I finally get the Portland police involved. I get them to network with the Hillsborough police, and we've got it all arranged that when he shows up to pick up the child for this visit, the Portland police officer is going to come meet with the Hillsborough police officer, who's going to relay that, yes, indeed, they're trying to arrest him, and that this is the opportunity, since they can't find him at church, they can't find him at his job, they can't find where he lives, this is how we're going to do it. So yes, it was many months after the fact. Yes, I tried to have him arrested at his church on Father's Day, etc. We're finally successful in that during that Starbucks exchange, and now he is taken to jail, and he spends, I understand, 4 or 5 days there because he is indeed in contempt of court. Long story short, for that violation, he gets jail time served, 2 years probation. He's ordered to take a psychological evaluation. Okay, so now we're probably in the beginning of 2006. So after about a month and a half in John's Landing, the house now has a buyer, and I have to vacate that home. I'm still not working. I don't have an income other than whatever I can negotiate every place I live. So I'm homeless again. I lived in a Motel 6 for 6 weeks that my friend Phyllis Fry paid for with credit cards. I left there and I lived in a motel in Gresham for a month, which Tyrus Nelson paid for with credit cards. And then I moved to O Street, and I moved in with Nicole Leslie at 39th and O. She had a beautiful 3-bedroom home on a large lot. Ezekiel and I were given a 2-bedroom suite upstairs. We had cable TV, we had the run of the house. She provided the food in return for me working in her antique store in Portland and helping to, she was in the process of remodeling this house, so there was plenty of work for me to do there.
Where was the house located?
39th and O Street in Vancouver. So, at that time, the court order was set up for us to make exchanges in Vancouver. It was supposed to be at a Starbucks on Main Street. We finally mutually agreed that him and his girlfriend Taryn could come to the house and we would exchange Ezekiel peacefully on the curb. That started happening. I was feeling pretty good about Taryn Mahuna, living with him and co-parenting my son. I had issues with the way she fed him, but I felt pretty secure that this woman was, someone in the house was actually parenting and looking out for the child. So I was feeling good about that relationship. And then one day they asked permission to take Ezekiel to Seattle for a church camping trip for a whole weekend. I was very uncomfortable with that, but I was trying to heal the situation. Miss Mahuna was going to be in the mix, so I finally said yes. And they acknowledged that they might be out of cell phone range all weekend. Scared me very much, but I finally agreed, and my stipulation was, when you get back to cell phone reality, call me. Let me know you've left the woods and you're starting your drive from Seattle. They did not do that. As you can imagine, as the day wears on and they should have been out of the woods by now, I should have received a call that they're on their way back. Nothing has happened. I can't reach them. When they show up to 39th and O Street, I was very angry. Perhaps hypomanic. I definitely gave them a piece of my mind. Why hadn't they called me as we arranged? Didn't think about it. They were busy, long trip, figured we'd deal with you later. So now I'm not real happy about having Taryn Mahuna supervise visits. But he's still living in the home with her. And so that's where we are at that point. Let's see, Christmas of 2006. I'm living with Nicole. Ezekiel's 2.5. We did Christmas at her house. He did part of his Christmas over at his house with Taryn and Wardell. The night that they came to pick Ezekiel up for Christmas, Mr. Gibson made a pass at me while his girlfriend was in the living room. We were friendly, fairly friendly at this point. We were exchanging without incident. I recall him slipping me a few $20 bills here and there to help. There was no, formal child support coming, but I would ask him, he'd slip me some money, and things were going pretty good. I'm thinking, we can all happily co-parent this child now. Then Miss Leslie informed me that she needed to rent out the rooms. She needed cash income for the house, and she asked me to move on. So once again, I still don't have an income or a home that I can take this child to. Mr. Gibson and his girlfriend, I'm going to think for a minute because I don't want to get the chronology. Well, let me say this. Mr. Gibson was living in Miss Mahuna's home in Vancouver, and they invited me to to stay there. Awkward as it was, I agreed because I had a need. So I now was living in the home with Mr. Gibson, who was sharing a bedroom with Miss Mahuna, and I was sharing Ezekiel's room, and we were both bunking in his little sports car bed because there wasn't anywhere else for me to sleep. Miss Mahuna decided to leave him. He got evicted, and now him and I, or Ezekiel, are about to be homeless. And this all happened in a matter of weeks, that I moved in, she moved out, he got evicted. Now all three of us are homeless. So he immediately starts looking for an apartment in Vancouver. I didn't. I was out looking to borrow money to go to a motel. So the day that we have to leave, he's secured an apartment in Vancouver on 48th Circle. I didn't agree to go there with him. He had some friends. Patrick was there. We all helped pack up the house. They moved him to 48th Circle, and I moved into a cheap motel off I-5. I can't tell you exactly where. Within a few miles of there. Ezekiel was sick. He was not happy being in the motel with all his belongings, being a dad. It was a struggle. I finally agreed before the night was out to make the child happy. I would leave the motel and go to Mr. Gibson's apartment, where I basically moved in that night. So the three of us are living under the same roof in an apartment in Vancouver. The apartment is rented in his name. I'm not on the lease. I have no financial obligation there, but now we've dug in once again as a family. We're under the same roof. I have not agreed to be this man's lover. I am trying to tiptoe between him and the other bedroom and Ezekiel. Went fairly smooth. Mr. Gibson and I tried to stay away from volatile topics, talk about the weather, watch TV, and it was kind of going okay. So now, I'm trying to get all the time frames straight, Your Honor. So it must be too tired. So I'm going to move on. If I have to, I'll clarify it later. Okay. So the next thing that happens is during that time frame that I'm living in the apartment with him and Ezekiel, one day him and I were out in his van. Ezekiel was at the daycare at the gymnastics. And he's driving, and he starts screaming at me about white people and slavery, and that I'm responsible and I need to apologize and make it right, and it's high volume. He's screaming at me. He's driving. I'm very frightened, overwhelmed, and I made the decision that I couldn't cope with this anymore. I was going to have a nervous breakdown if I didn't choose to get away from this man. So that was the night I decided to go to Arizona. I called my webmaster in Tucson. I couldn't go to Stacy's or Louise's or Patrick's because he had stalked me there over and over when I fled. I have no more local friends. I have no family. So I called my friend Don, who I had known for 4 years, and him and his wife invited us to Tucson to live in their apartment with them and her 5-year-old daughter, Alyssa. I borrowed money from Gus Warner and his wife to take a Greyhound to Tucson. In order to get to the Greyhound station at a timely manner the next morning without Mr. Gibson realizing what I was doing, I had to find somewhere to go that night. So I called a man named Ken Calvin and asked if Ezekiel and I could bunk with him. Told him I'm fleeing. He knew about my relationship. We'd been friends for about a year. He was interested in having his elder college included in the business proposal I was involved with. He had taken me to the city club and introduced me to the mayor, to Gretchen Kafori, and Governor Kulangowski was connected to him by family. So he's out taking me around, introducing me to powerful people in Portland. He gave me his old laptop. At first he wanted $300 for it. I agreed. And then as the year wore on, he had a state-of-the-art computer. I couldn't pay for it. And he said, keep it. We're working in business together. And then here comes this night where I asked this friend to house me so I can sneak out of town with this child. I had had several incidents in my friendship with this man of him trying to grope me or kiss me. I had raged at him about it. I had discussed it with my friends. Figured I'm out of outs, but perhaps this man could be appropriate in my hour of need with child in tow. We can get through one night. We didn't. I arrived there. We discussed the sleeping arrangements. He had a one-bedroom apartment. It was packed, although neat and orderly. There was only one path to his desk chair, one chair for a visitor. Then there was one path to the bedroom, a floor space where Ezekiel and I were going to sleep, and he was going to have to step around us to get out of bed and get to the bathroom. He's 72 years old. He's alcoholic, admittedly, and impotent. So, laid Ezekiel down on the floor, on the mat that I'd prepared for him and I, sat down to vent and chat and drink with my friend. And yes, I'm not a wine drinker. He's a wino, so he handled it. I didn't. And I definitely got drunk. In the course of that, I'm sitting next to him in his office. It's the only place in his tiny apartment to sit, and he makes a couple of inappropriate gestures, putting his hand on my knee. I tried to kind of kiss my face at one point, and I'm trying to just fend him off and deal with this, get through the night, and get out of town. Union Station was 10 blocks from his apartment. I could get out of there, get to Greyhound by myself, and get out of town. So after we drink, he goes to bed in his bed. I'm laying on the floor. Ezekiel's asleep on the floor. I'm out cold. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I hear him. And I finally realize he's trying to get me in bed with him. And I'm saying, no, I've got a child here. What the hell is the matter with you? I'm fleeing. What are you doing? He won't stop.
Move on, please.
I call Louise Bouchard. I hit the sidewalk at 4 a.m. with 7 pieces of luggage and a child, and she now takes me home and cares for me until it's time to get me to the Greyhound. Ezekiel and I take the trip. We get all the way to Arizona. We move into the apartment complex. There's a child in the apartment his age. There's playground, swimming pool, all the amenities you could want. We had a lovely 1-month vacation. I got to relax while people helped me parent and, was starting to rejuvenate for the first time in years. On day 30, the landlord said because I wasn't on the lease, I had to leave. Still have no money and no life. So I called the local domestic violence shelter, told them the whole enchilada, and they accepted me. This is in the desert, and it was rough circumstances. We toughed it out for 2 weeks, but Ezekiel was being bullied by 2 of the children there. The shelter policy was that I was not allowed to intervene. So while I'm witnessing this, I can't do anything. I'm supposed to go find an employee who's on the other side of the property and wait for them to come and address it, and Ezekiel was being battered. So I start looking for ways to get out of the shelter. I met a woman named Maria Sepra. She owned a metaphysical store in Tucson. I met her by chance. She had a fifth wheel on her big spread, and she invited Ezekiel and I to move into that fifth wheel and agreed to help me find, as a local, to help me find a way to continue to float my boat in Tucson. But I was welcome in her fifth wheel while her and I worked on that. I moved in her beautiful fifth wheel. I mean, God, we were living in luxury on her beautiful property where she cared for people and ran her shop. Within 3 days' time, she got me an opportunity for a, what do they call it, apprenticeship on a beautiful organic ranch in Tubac, Arizona, a couple hours south of Tucson. It was a 165-acre organic ranch. I mean, these are my people doing my thing. It's gorgeous. There's horses and llamas and goats, and we had our own 20-foot yurt to ourselves. I was provided with 12 hours a day of daycare while I worked in the organic fields. All of our beautiful organic meals were provided. It was heaven on earth for me. Except that as the weeks rolled by, I finally started understanding that I was in a cult. This was a religious sect. They expected me to give up my cell phone, to commit to them forever, to commit my future income, to commit that I would stay there. I was planning, let's see, this was, let's call it July of 2008. Okay, so now I'm clear that this is a religious cult. I've been through 7 years of religious abuse with Mr. Gibson. I'm going to bail out. So I let the ranch know that I'm not committing to foreverness. They're gentle with me. They give me 3 days to leave, and they're pretty supportive while I'm looking for my next home. I negotiated a deal to go back to Tucson. I had a home to live in, and my deal was that I was to pack up that home for the owner who was moving, and in return for all of that packing, because she had lupus, I could stay in the house. She would pay my plane ticket home, because I was now considering coming back to Oregon. I knew I needed to get in front of a judge before I got arrested or whatever was going to happen next. So she was willing to pay my way home. I believe I also got $200 in cash, so I had money to feed Ezekiel and I, because she was not there. She turned over this house to me, and I was to pack up her pod, and so she gave me cash, etc. So I started planning my trip home. Now, I have not received any legalese in Tucson at this point, or in Tubac. According to Mr. Hunt, the legalese showed up after I left Tucson. So I have no idea that Debbie Fong-Uribe is in my life, or that there is paperwork floating around. I emailed Mr. Gibson and volunteered that I would be flying home on X day, that it's time that we, start working through this, get in front of a judge, and that he could meet me at the airport, take the child for 3 or 4 days while I hunted for a home. Certainly was concerned about this, but I'm trying to offer an olive branch, and I have a desperate need. I need to come home and find a home and daycare and whatever, and try and look stable before I face a judge. So I land. Wardell is there with little Jocelyn, who was our former neighbor, one of Ezekiel's best buddies. He's excited. He runs to Jocelyn. He runs to Dad. He's thrilled to see his dad. Yes, he's missed Dad in Arizona. We've had discussions on why we're there. And so, yes, he missed his dad. No one's ever said this child doesn't love his dad. No one's ever said they don't have beautiful moments together. He missed his dad, ran to him at the airport, jumped in his arms. 2 minutes, they're gone, and a man approaches me and hands me a pack of legalese. Now I'm aware that I have a legal problem. Now I'm very concerned that I just sent my son off with Wardell Gibson. But we're in it. So this is the beginning of Clark County entering my life. Immediately thereafter, the very first hearing that I recall, Judge Stonke officiated. That's when he asked Mr. Gibson to get a license. He was pretty upset with me. I had not handled some paperwork right. I hadn't done something right in the procedure, so I didn't get, that hearing didn't go well. Then the next hearing we had was in front of Judge Pro Tem Juliet Lako. At that time, Ms. Lako put in a child support order. Mr. Gibson was supposed to pay $440 per month. He was supposed to pay, if I recall correctly, 2/3 of the preschool bill, and he was to continue paying my cell phone bill until I could take it over. He agreed to all of that. 2 months later, he defaulted on the child support and the preschool bill, which caused Ezekiel to get bumped out of child care. So now I had no child care, so I filed contempt charges. We came in front of you on that issue. I believe he was told to pay the back child support, etc. I haven't ever received all of that judgment, but we moved on. Okay, let me collect my thoughts. So now I'm living on Southwest Alice Street at Louise Bouchard's. The child had been in a daycare 3 blocks away where I could walk him there and therefore go pursue work, etc. And now he's been thrown out because the bill isn't paid. And I'm taking heat that I don't have a home, home of my own and an income, so I'm once again trying to work out all of this. So now I have a court order that says I cannot move without notifying the court. I'm told there's 3 counties that I can choose from if I need to move around, but I'm not welcome to live outside of those counties. However, I can, take the child for a day to a county outside of that or whatever. I'm allowed to travel with him, but I'm not allowed to move. Okay, so now I'm living with Louise, and he's living in Vancouver on 48th Circle, and he brought up this incident where he had visitation.
And where does Louise live?
She lives on 622 Southwest Alice Street in Portland, Oregon, a 97219, which is where I'm currently living. So I'm living with Louise. Ezekiel is going up to Wardell's. It's December, a few weeks before Christmas, so now it must be 2008. 2008. I've been back from Arizona now. August, September, October, November. It's December. And he has a weekend visitation. I send Ezekiel up there, and then we have the worst blizzard, and God knows. Our, 90-degree driveway is iced in. It's obvious that the transportation is shut down, and I'm concerned that Ezekiel's going to be stranded with him endlessly. So I asked Mr. Gibson's permission to come. I worked my way up there on foot and through what TriMet buses were running, And we've all agreed that I'm welcome to dig in for the duration of the blizzard, since there's no safe way to get Ezekiel back to Portland. And Portland, as he mentioned, was way more sucked in than Vancouver. So I'm there. We're all living under the same roof. We don't know how long. And probably 2 or 3 days after I arrive, I'm scheduled to go see Dr. Johnson. And Mr. Gibson is going to care for the child, drive me over there, drop me off so that I can satisfy my court-ordered psych evaluation. But when I rolled into Mr. Johnson's office that day, I think it's important to note that I was living under the same roof with this man again, under a tremendous amount of strain. And I certainly relayed that to Dr. Johnson. So I leave there. I go back to Mr. Gibson's house that same day. No, the next day. Ezekiel and I are scheduled to have a court-ordered session with Dr. Williams. So now day 2, Mr. Gibson has to take us over there and drop us off, and I spend an hour sitting in front of a video camera playing games with Ezekiel for Dr. Williams. And we get that done. Now we're still in the middle of the blizzard. I'm living, and Mr. Gibson and I are at co-parenting, preparing for Christmas. We're talking about how much money do we have, what can we reasonably, do for Christmas, and we're trying to get along. And we start actually having some fun as Santa and buying gifts and, getting ready for Christmas. A few days after that, Mr. Gibson and I and Ezekiel are out. We lived in the upstairs apartment, and we're at the bottom of the apartment, and Ezekiel starts acting out on him and saying what I also deemed inappropriate things, just talking back and not being appropriate with Dad. And Wardell immediately starts to take over and discipline the child. I was a little overwhelmed, but the child was being inappropriate to his father, and I decided to hold my breath and see how he was going to deal with it. He took the child by the arms and he told him to go upstairs, and the child said no. So he took Ezekiel by the arms, and he's dragging him up the stairs, and the child's screaming bloody murder. I'm behind them. But I haven't interacted yet. I'm concerned, but I want to see how this plays out. I stood on the balcony in between his apartment and the one directly next door is about 3 feet. The people in those apartments are good friends of ours. They have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. We interact all the time. So I'm standing on the landing. Mr. Gibson has dragged the child into the apartment. I'm talking to Becca, and it's starting to go forward. I'm talking to her. We're kind of discussing what's going on, and I decide to enter the apartment. I find Mr. Gibson in the bathroom with Ezekiel in the dark reading a passage from the Bible about exorcism. And he's trying to exorcise the demons out of this child because he's having a tantrum. It's a very small bathroom. Ezekiel's sitting on the toilet in the dark. Mr. Gibson is standing over him. I threw the light switch on and said, "We're not doing this." He turned the light switch off. I turned it back on and said, "We are not doing this." So he continued to read his litany out of the Bible with the light on about the child needing to exorcise these demons. I made the decision at that moment that I never wanted to leave my son alone with this man again, but there's a court order that says I have to every other weekend, and I agreed to move back in. He was thrilled. He's still trying to create a relationship with me. Much as he hates me, he loves me just as much, and he's still trying to make it work. I agreed to move in. I did not agree to move into his bed. I'm still living in the little bitty toddler sports car bed with Ezekiel. Admittedly, I worked that terrifying situation every way I had to. I never had sexual relationships with this man, but I tried to get along with him, and I probably led him on to believe that someday that might happen between us again if we could make this work. I didn't mean it. I'm trying to work a really awkward situation. So this is December 2009, Your Honor. We're under court order, but we're now under the same roof once again. He is working full-time. I'm parenting full-time. I have no income. He has the money, the apartment, the car. It's not going well. So by March, I start keeping a diary because I know I'm going to flee again. I'm under court order now, so I start getting a little more responsible about documenting my case. So this is now March of 2010. My biggest challenge with this man is that I can't get him to tell the truth. I want intervention, I want treatment, I want a lie detector test. I have no money. So I called the Steve Wilkos Show, which is a reality TV show run by an ex-cop who referees relationships. He offers DNA tests, lie detector tests at his expense. This ex-cop referees your argument on stage, and then they offer aftercare at their expense. This is everything I wanted that the court would not give me, so I called the show.
So run that by me again. What's he offering you that the court won't give you?
They're going to pay for a lie detector test or a DNA test, whatever our argument requires. This ex-cop is going to referee our discussion about our issues on stage, and then they are going to provide aftercare in our community. They're going to pay for counseling for me and Mr. Gibson and the child. I did not have any other agency willing to bankroll those things for us. I'm in the publicity field. I know how Hollywood works. I reached out to a production company, and they called me back on Mother's Day while I'm out on an outing with Mr. Gibson. I extracted myself from him. I talked to the producer, and now she needs to talk to him before they're willing to cut plane tickets to New York. So I held my breath. I told her what my logistics was and how fragile this situation was, and she's going to call him later that night and see if he's willing to appear on the show. All three of us are in the apartment when the phone call comes in from the producer. I'm scared to death. I tell Mr. Gibson who's on the line and why they'd like to speak with him, and he agrees to get on the phone with the producer. Ezekiel is sitting at the computer at the table in the dining room. He's pacing the apartment out to the balcony and back, and I'm kind of hovering between him and the child, trying to overhear his conversation and trying to keep Ezekiel on track. After about a half an hour of listening to him spin his story, which, as you know, I don't agree with, I finally walked up to him with the producer on the phone and said, "Look, it's time to man up. Are you willing to take a lie detector test?" And he starts screaming, and it starts getting out of hand, but the producer's on the phone the whole time. So it escalates.
A lie detector test for what?
For all the issues I claimed he's lying about. I'm in criminal court now.
Like what? What are you talking about? You call this place in New York to go on TV to get him to take a lie detector test for what purpose?
I'm in a court battle here in Clark County.
You're living with the man, cohabitating, so it didn't seem like it was much of a battle at that point.
I think
So
I've,
what's the purpose of a lie detector that you so needed? I don't understand.
okay. I think I've kind of explained the circumstances of why I'm living with him again. It's not because he's a great guy and I want to have a relationship with him. I'm concerned about the child's safety. Every time I've gone to court with him, I've been up against what I considered perjured testimony. Now I'm about to start facing you and Commissioner Scheinberg and go down a road in a lawsuit, and I want to prove this man lies. So I also want therapy. And I want to try and get some help for this situation. Instead of just beating each other in court, this is now going on round 3 of us in court. I want resolution. I want help. I want counseling. And I want to be able to deal with this now next set of litigation, which I am now the respondent on, differently. I want to argue these issues with a referee and get counseling for our family, but there is no financial institute offering to do that except a television production company. So, he's on the phone with the producer. Things are escalating. And Ezekiel's in the room. But the producer is still on the phone. And he's yelling Satan things at me, and I'm yelling at him, and the child is in the room. The producer's on the phone. So finally, I decide to take the child and go to the apartment next door. I've been there many times when things were out of control in our apartment, and they had domestic violence issues. Their children had to hide in our apartment on many occasions. So they're screaming and yelling. The producer on the phone. It's getting too wild for the child. I take the child. I head across the hall. I ask them. They've heard all the screaming. They're 3 feet away. Can I stay here? I'm not feeling safe over there. So Ezekiel and I camp in their apartment for several hours. Wardell keeps coming over. He's very angry. He demands that Ezekiel come back to the apartment with him. I said, no, we're not going anywhere. Finally, an hour or so later, he comes in again and demands, and I finally agree that Ezekiel and I will both come over and stay with him. He's agreed to be calm. In front of the neighbors, he agreed to be calm and just stop it so that Ezekiel and I could come back. That's when I made this decision to go to the shelter in St. Helens. This was now becoming an explosive relationship again. And even though I'm under court order and I know that I'm in danger of being arrested, I feel threatened enough, I leave. I go to a shelter in St. Helens, Oregon, which is out of the scope of what the court said I could do. I knew that. I had called 20 shelters. It's the only one that had a bed for me. I went. So now comes the next round. Now I am in contempt of court. And Mr. Gibson and his attorney, Debbie Fong-Uribe, are bringing action to put me in jail for being in contempt of court. I'm getting really tired. Is there any way we could break now and start over, or how much longer? I've got a long ways to go. I could use a break.
Yeah. I need to go to a meeting also, so we'll reconvene at 1:30. 1:30.
Thank you, Your Honor.